When the police lights flickered against the glass walls of our house on Alder Rise, I realized my stepmother had called him before she called me. I was sitting on the stairs, phone in hand, staring at the last message she sent. "Stay where you are, I'll handle it." It sounded like protection, but protection, I would later learn, depends on who you're protecting from whom. The night smelled like burnt cedar and rain. The sound of her voice downstairs was steady, almost professional. "Yes, he's fine." "No, he didn't mean it." I should have recognized that tone. It was the same one she used when hiding something breakable. In the quiet that followed, I thought about how she once told me every family had one person who collected the lies and made them look like glass ornaments. I used to believe she was talking about my father. Now I wasn't so sure. She met me in the hallway later, hair damp, perfume faint, holding the phone like a weapon she hadn't fired yet. "You shouldn't have come back tonight," she said. Her eyes weren't angry, they were rehearsed. "You told him?" I asked. "You promised me." "I promised to keep you safe," she interrupted. "And sometimes that means calling the only person who can control the damage." Her choice of words, damage, not danger, cut deeper than I expected. The air between us hummed with something unfinished. In the dining room, the clock on the glass shelf ticked unevenly, a sound I'd grown to associate with nights that changed everything. I wanted to ask her if she ever meant the things she said, if all her tenderness had been a form of defense. Instead, I watched her adjust the curtains, as if sealing the house from what was already inside. The next morning, the window overlooking Whitlock Bay reflected two figures, her and my father, talking softly by the car. From this distance, they looked like a single silhouette divided by light. When she came back inside, she found me in the kitchen wiping the same coffee spill over and over. "It's over," she said, setting her keys down. "He won't press charges." I didn't ask what he had on her to make her choose him again. I didn't need to. "Thank you," I said instead, my voice small. She reached out, brushed something invisible from my sleeve, and whispered, "You'll understand when you're older." I'm 29 now, older than she was then. I finally do understand that every promise she made came with a lock I couldn't see. I still live near Alder Rise, close enough to hear the sea against the glass at night. Sometimes I imagine calling her, just to ask whether she ever slept after that night. But then I remember the way her hand trembled when she hung up the phone. The way the house seemed to exhale afterward, relieved to have chosen its side. And I know the only thing that still connects us is the echo of that first call. Outside my window, a siren passes, blue light catching the reflection in my glass. It looks, for a second, like she's still standing there, protecting me from something I can't name. Then the light fades, and all that remains is the ticking clock. The window remembers what we deny. In the mornings after that night, the house felt smaller. My stepmother moved quietly, her slippers barely whispering against the cold marble floor. She opened windows just enough to let air in but not sound out. My father had returned to Whitlock City for work, or so she said, though his coat still hung by the door. I watched her routine: black coffee at 6, a folded newspaper she never read, and a phone she kept face down. "You should eat," she told me once, setting down toast she hadn't touched herself. I nodded, but neither of us moved. Silence had become a language we both understood, her guilt in the pauses, my resentment in the clatter of the plate. On the third morning, I caught her staring at the reflection of the bay instead of looking outside. It was then I realized she was afraid, not of him, but of what I might remember. Later that week, I found the yellow envelope. It was tucked under a stack of papers on the kitchen counter, half hidden as if it had been placed there deliberately for someone to discover. Her handwriting, careful and deliberate, addressed to my father, though I hadn't seen him in the house for days. I opened it, my fingers trembling. Inside was a single line: "We both know what happens next." It was the sort of thing that should have made sense, but it didn't. It didn't explain the look in her eyes when she'd whispered, "I'll protect you," nor the way her hands had clenched when I asked if she'd ever loved him. That night, I waited for her in the living room, the house dark except for the glow of streetlights through the glass walls. She stepped in, her coat still damp from the rain. The envelope was missing. "You don't need to know everything," she said, voice low, almost sad. I didn't ask her what had been in it. Instead, I asked, "Did you ever choose me?" She hesitated. "Of course I did." But I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, and for the first time, I wondered if the answer had always been him. The following week, the house felt different. The air was colder, though it was still early spring. My stepmother no longer moved as quietly. Her steps were sharper, like she had given up trying to be invisible. I would catch her glancing at the clock in the hall, her gaze lingering a moment longer than necessary, as though waiting for something to happen. When she spoke, it was always too much or too little. She'd ask how my day was, but her eyes were always distant, as if looking for something just beyond reach. The cracks in her calmness became more visible. One evening, when I came home late from the cafe, I found her sitting by the window, staring out into the dark. The blinds were half open, and the room felt unnaturally still. She didn't turn to acknowledge me, but I saw her fingers trembling ever so slightly as they gripped the edge of the chair. "I never meant for you to know," she said, the words barely above a whisper. "I thought I could protect you from all of it." I stayed silent, unsure whether she was talking about my father, about herself, or about me. But it didn't matter. The thing I had been running from, the thing I thought would break me, had already changed me. And now, standing in front of her, I could see the fractures in her life as clearly as the ones in mine. Neither of us would ever be the same again. As I turned to leave the room, I heard her say, "I'm sorry." It was the first time in years I had heard her apologize. And as the door clicked shut behind me, I realized it wasn't for me. It was for the lies she'd been living, the ones she would never tell me. That night, I slept with the window open, the air sharp with the scent of salt and cold rain. The house had never felt quieter, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something. When I woke, the clock by my bedside blinked 6:13 a.m., and I could hear her moving downstairs. The soft click of the kettle, the rattle of dishes, small, inconsequential noises that made the stillness in my chest grow heavier. I didn't want to go down. I didn't want to face her or the silence that always filled the spaces between us. But I did. She was in the kitchen, her back turned as she set the table. The yellow envelope was on the counter again, but this time, it was empty. The paper had been torn in half, as though someone had destroyed the evidence, only to leave the remnants behind. I stood there, frozen, watching her as she moved about the room like she was in a trance. When she finally turned, her eyes didn't meet mine. Instead, she looked past me, toward the window where the rain had stopped. "You're leaving," I said, though it wasn't a question. Her shoulders stiffened, and she didn't answer right away. For a moment, she seemed like someone else, like the woman she was before my father. Before I had stepped into her life and broken something she had fought so hard to keep intact. Finally, she spoke, her voice distant but steady. I was never meant to protect you, she whispered. I thought I could. I was wrong. The silence that followed was thick, and when I turned to leave, the house seemed to swallow me whole, closing behind me with a soft, final thud. I didn't look back, but somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a door clicking open echoed in the house. It was the sound of her stepping out of my life for good. The house, now just a collection of glass and shadow, was empty, finally and completely.